Well, it's been quite a while since I've posted a fly time video, and that's mainly because I've been field testing a lot of different patterns, and I only want to select the ones that are most successful, at least in my hands. So this is definitely one of those. A few years back, an acquaintance told me he'd got a lot of unwanted fly fishing gear that he'd never really used, and very kindly he gave it to me. And included in all this stuff were some boxes of various flies, all commercially tied. And among these were 3 of this pattern. Now they're obviously topwater flies, but of a type I've just not seen before. I've got no idea how old they are or where this guy obtained them, and I've looked online and I've yet to see anything quite like them. So if anyone knows what it's called or who designed it, or if a particular fly shop sells them, please let me know in the comments. For now, for want of a better name, I'm just going to call it an SRC slider. And this is one of those 3 originals, and you can see that unlike your typical gurgler style with foam along the top of the hook, this one has the foam on the sides tied down to form these almost like petrel fins, and this creates a nice wake in the current. The foam on the original's got quite an open structure, almost like packing material. Now I did try fishing these, and the first 2 just fell apart within a few casts, and here's one of them, and it did give me an opportunity to see how it was constructed. So the main feature is that the body has a layer of foam underneath the body braid, which keeps the fly fishing horizontally. And the other thing I was able to reverse engineer is how that foam head gets tied in. So now this is my version. It's tied slightly smaller than the original, and I've caught a number of sea-run cutthroat on it. If you stay tuned at the end, I've got some footage of how I fish it, and you'll see a fish being caught. Now I've also tied it in white and silver, which does catch fish, and I've also done a darker variant, which is also effective, but I do prefer the chartreuse and pearl with the white head, if only because it's easier to see. So the hook I'm going to use for this is an extra long streamer hook from Gamakatsu in size 8. This is the SP11 3L3H. Now the Mustad S74 SNP DT is also good, but very hard to find in size 8. I'll put a list of the materials at the end of the video. Now the thread choice is very important, and I'm using 100 denier GSP from Vivus. And this has 5 times the tensile strength of ordinary thread, and it lies flat so it won't cut through the foam. If you've not used it before, it does tend to unravel, but it does come back together under tension. It's also a bit slippery to get started. So I'll wrap back about 1/4 of the shank length, and then I'm going to cut away the waist piece, and you'll notice GSP can be a little hard to cut cleanly with scissors too. Never mind. And I'm going to tie in a 5-inch piece of flat pearl diamond braid. This also has a tendency to unravel the moment you cut it, like that. So you have to kind of pull it back under the tying thread as you wrap it in. So I'll tie that in along the top of the hook until I'm level with where the barb would have been. There. Now the foam I'm using is 2mm thick fly foam, which comes in sheets of different colours. Obviously I'm using white here, and using a paper cutter I've taken off a full length strip about 2mm wide, so it has a square cross section. I'm laying that on the hook, the full length of the body, then I'll just roughly tack it in place with my thread, and then I'll wind back with closer wraps to compress it more. Then finally advance the thread back towards the eye again. Now I'll take the free end of that strip and carefully wrap the hook in touching turns, being sure not to pull it so tight that I compress the foam completely. I do want to create a buoyant body. So when I get 3/4 of the way back along the hook, I'm tying it off. And then trim away the excess at an angle. I'm going to cover the foam with the braid, wrapping it in the opposite direction and overlapping it slightly as I go. And when I get to the front, I'll tie that off. And I want to kind of end up with a tapered area to attach the wing onto. So this is going to fray like that, but you just need to tidy up as best you can. Now at this point I feel it's important to coat the body with a thin UV resin for protection, but in the interests of time I'm not going to do that now on this video. But assuming I've done that, the next thing I'll do is to add an underwing of pearl crystal flash. I'm just taking 3 strands. I'm going to cut those 3 in half to make 6. And just advance the thread, and then wrap the flash bundle in front of the thread, pull it up and on top of the hook, and then just wrap back over it towards the bend. And when it's sitting the way I want it, I'm going to cut it so it's about half a hook length behind the bend. That looks good. Now I've got a chartreuse dyed bucktail, and I'm going to select some of the straighter, more tapered hair from the top end of the tail. It's a good fly, this, for using up this straight hair. And I'm going to just take about a half a pencil width in diameter. That's enough. And I'm going to clean and stack that. Now the tips are all nicely lined up. And I'm going to measure the bucktail so that it's just slightly longer than the flash. Cut it at that measurement. I'm going to take 1 loose turn around the bunch and then pull up tightly, and then secure the hair with tight wraps, making sure it looks straight. That's fine. Okay, I like that. Now I've prepared another strip of fly foam, which is about 3 inches long and maybe 3/4 of the width of the hook gap. Just trim that a bit more. Now you need to squeeze the 2 ends of the strip on either side of the hook so that they come to about that point where the wing emerges. See? So that's about between 1/4 and 1/3 of the way along the hook shank. Now you need to start to bind the foam on very tightly. Just keep checking it straight. Now once it's positioned, you can cut the foam at the fold. Now you can continue to bind that foam down very tightly. And you want to extend the thread wraps till they're immediately behind the eye. Now you can let the thread hang right in front of the wing and fold the foam back on itself. Pick up the thread and then wrap it tightly half a dozen times or so around that same point. And when you're sure everything's square, you can go ahead and put in a couple of whip finishes. There's one. Two. Now I can remove the GSP and cut the fins to length. I'm going for maybe the same length as the head. I've made that side a little bit too long. Yeah, unfortunately that first side was a tad short, but never mind, you get the idea. And it's definitely okay to experiment with those proportions to make a fly that swims the way you want to. So finally I'm going to add a generous drop of super glue on the thread, and I'm going to let it soak in the space between the foam sides on the top and the bottom, just to make sure that the foam is locked in place. So that's the finished SRC slider, or whatever it is. And you see that nice profile at the front. Well, I hope you enjoyed this video, and now I'm going to show a little bit of footage of the fly itself being fished. So I'm fishing a 5-weight floating line with a 2x tapered leader, and I've tied the slider on with a loop knot so it can just wiggle a little bit. I'm using a simple retrieve, just continual 8 or 9 inch pulls every second or so, across and slightly against the current, which is flowing right to left. And there's a fish that I just missed. So you will miss some fish with this technique, as you do whenever you fish a topwater fly. Again, just regular strips with that tiny pause. And there's another missed fish. And this time I've connected. And this one is nicely hooked right in the corner of the mouth. And that barbless hook is already out. So I'm just taking a moment to calm the fish down and then get him out of the net and away.